on Christmas Eve, beneath the heavy velvet of a snow-drenched Manhattan sky, where glass skyscrapers blinked like mechanical giants in slumber. Alexander Reese Crawford, known in the media as the Silicon Sledgehammer, sat motionless on a weathered bench outside Bryant Park, his $1,000 coat offering no warmth against the chill clawing into his bones. His eyes glazed as if looking through time itself. A man once toasted by billionaires, feared by rivals, envied by millions. Now just another shadow flickering against the cold neon of a city that never stopped celebrating itself, even when it crushed souls beneath its boots. And in that moment, despite the Rolex gleaming on his wrist, the world felt farther away than it ever had. He had spent a lifetime conquering industries, manipulating markets with chess master precision, acquiring companies and discarding them like crumpled napkins. But none of that prepared him for the hollow echo reverberating in his chest ever since his fiancée left with a letter that read, "I never knew the real you because I don't think you ever did," or the funeral of the one woman who had raised him, his old nanny, Esther, whose ashes he scattered quietly into the Hudson, while the press speculated he was in Europe closing another deal. And now, surrounded by tourists laughing, lovers kissing, children pointing at a giant tree lit with electric stars, he felt like a man made of smoke, one gust away from disappearing, when a small voice, gentle, high, and strangely clear, broke through the invisible wall he'd built around himself, and he turned to see a little girl no older than 7, with unruly curls spilling out from a pink knit cap, cheeks rosy from the wind, a woolen coat patched at the elbows, mittens dangling from a thread through her sleeves, and eyes, dear God, those eyes fathomably deep, full of that untarnished kindness children have before the world teaches them how to be cruel. And she tilted her head, peering at him like a mystery, and said, "You look sad, mister. Want to meet my mommy?" A sentence so impossibly simple, so disarming in its sincerity, that for a moment Alexander could only blink, stunned that anyone could see through him, let alone someone so small and pure. And he whispered, "Where's your mommy?" with a voice cracked from disuse, and she pointed across the street to a small stone church with yellow windows that glowed like candlelight behind frost, where a banner flapped in the wind that read community shelter, warm meals, and hope. And when she reached out her tiny mittened hand, he stared at it for several seconds, as if it were a relic from a forgotten world. And finally, drawn by some force he could neither name nor resist, he let her lead him across the snow-slick sidewalk, each step feeling less like a walk and more like surrender. Inside the church, Warmth washed over him. Like mercy, there were folding tables lined with trays of mashed potatoes, rice, donated bread rolls, paper cups of steaming cider, and faces, so many weathered, weary faces marked by the quiet pain of hard lives, but also lit with unexpected laughter and shared humanity. The kind of joy you don't buy, but earn by surviving together. And the girl, whom he would learn later was named Hope, guided him through the crowd as if she were showing him a kingdom made of kindness, and brought him to a woman ladling soup into bowls, her long sleeves rolled up, apron stained, her hair tied back in a bun of beautiful chaos, her face lined with fatigue, yet glowing with a quiet, luminous strength. And she turned as Hope tugged at her sleeve and said, "Mommy, I brought someone." And their eyes, metallic sanders, and her sand, it wasn't cinematic or thunderstruck or anything that would make a Hollywood director jump, but it was real, painfully real. Two souls colliding, not in fireworks, but in recognition that neither of them belonged to the noise outside anymore, that they'd both been carved hollow in different ways. Rachel looked at him, not with judgment or awe, but with careful kindness, and apologized quickly for her daughter's boldness, but he shook his head and said, "She might have saved me tonight." And she tilted her head slightly, like she could see just enough of the truth to know he wasn't being polite, and handed him a bowl of soup without asking his name, without Googling his face, without scanning for status symbols, and said, "You're welcome to stay," and stay he did first that evening, listening to the chatter, laughing shyly as Hope drew him with crayon on a napkin, then the next night, bringing cartons of food anonymously, then every day after, sweeping floors, restocking shelves, unloading boxes, learning names, earning trust, and the longer he stayed, the more the ice within him melted under the gentle warmth of people who had nothing yet gave everything, like Danny, a teenage runaway who wrote poetry on soup napkins, Maria, a widow who taught Hope Spanish lullabies, Thomas, an Iraq veteran who called him sir until Alexander finally said, "Just Alex," and Thomas nodded, saying, "That's better," and Rachel, who watched him with curiosity, her smiles cautious but warmer each day, who once asked, over coffee, "You're not from around here, are you?" And he admitted he lived a few blocks away in a glass tower. And she chuckled, "Figures," then paused and added, "But I think you're finally home now." And he wasn't sure why that made him want to cry, but it did. The transformation wasn't sudden, but it was seismic. He started painting again, something he hadn't done since he was 12, when his father slapped the brush out of his hand and said, "Dreams don't pay the bills." And Rachel found his sketchbook one afternoon and smiled so softly it made his throat tighten. The world outside kept spinning news of market crashes, celebrity divorces, political chaos, but Alexander no longer lived in headlines. He lived in moments, watching hope sleep, curled on his chest as snow fell quietly outside, holding Rachel's calloused hand during community prayers, teaching the shelter kids how to draw trees with shadows and lighten, till one day a reporter did spot him unloading blankets, and the story went viral. Billionaire CEO found living among the homeless. But instead of retreating, Alexander stepped forward and addressed the media. Not with shame, but purpose, he sold his remaining shares, liquidated half his assets, and founded the Hope Initiative, named after the little girl who reminded him he still had a heart. And from that moment forward, his wealth became a weapon for mercy, building shelters, funding addiction clinics, opening community schools, all quietly, all without the need for applause. And through it all, Rachel stood beside him, not as a symbol, not as charity, but as a partner, equal in strength and wisdom, and slowly, gently, their bond deepened not in fiery declarations, but in glances, in shared silences, in late-night talks over coffee brewed from cheap tins, in the simple joy of folding laundry together while hope giggled nearby. A year later, on the anniversary of their meeting, Alexander knelt in the very church where he'd first tasted soup made by hands that never expected anything back, and asked Rachel to marry him, not with diamonds or theatrics, but with a ring made of recycled silver, inscribed with the word found. And she said yes, tears spilling over, and hope yelled finally, before hugging them both so hard they nearly toppled. They married with paper flowers and plastic chairs, surrounded by people who'd seen them both rise, fall, and rise again. Not a celebrity guest list, but a family forged in resilience. And that night, under a sky filled with stars that no longer felt indifferent, Alexander sat beside his new wife and daughter, a man no longer defined by what he owned or built or broke, but by what he chose to hold. And as hope leaned on his shoulder and whispered, "You're not sad anymore, right?" he kissed her forehead and whispered back, "No, my sweet girl, I'm finally whole." And in that moment, unfiltered, bathed in the golden light of redemption, Reese Crawford, the man who once ruled the world but never belonged to it, realized he had been saved not by therapy or therapy apps or leadership seminars or even time, but by a little girl's question asked in innocence on a night he had almost given up. And from that moment forward, he made it his mission to ask others the same, in every language, in every city, through every action. Are you sad, my friend? Do you want to meet something that feels like love?